little Foxy, it's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
Aloha mai kako, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Moana Nui Mana Bombs. What the heck is going on with my mouth right now? La, 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 la. Okay, edit that out. Yeah, that part. Aloha mai kako, everyone. Welcome to the Moana Nui podcast and today's Mana Bomb segment. My name is Moana, and I'm joining all of you from the East Coast, the cold and frigid East Coast.
Aloha mai kako. It's Kanoilani Davis, Mana Bombs powered by Mahina Designs. Calling in from Molokai Nui Ahina, where the winds are blowing. It's not cold and snowing, but no buts. It's a beautiful day. I'm so sorry y'all have to deal with that.
It's beautiful, and we will enjoy the beautiful day virtually through you.
Feel the sun that's coming in from this window.
I do. I'm a little bit jelly because today, our high was 32, and there was not a lot of sun. So,
oh my gosh!
And we just had 2 days of snow. So I'm like, come on, melt the snow in my driveway.
There you go.
But yeah, so today's Mana Bomb is. You can have compassion and refuse to put up with someone's nonsense.
Ooh.
Let us know what you guys think about this. We're going to get into this today, but we want to hear your thoughts too. So leave us some comments. Let us know your thoughts. And as we go along, maybe we can dive deeper into what this really means.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You can have compassion and refuse to put up with someone's nonsense. This one goes into leaning into boundaries, which we've heard 100 times. Have your boundaries, create your boundaries. But the question is, did you create the consequence? And that's where I think people really get stuck. That's the hardest part. It is actually doing what you're going to say and say what you're going to do. So, for example, I wrote some examples down on Mahina on Instagram. I will not tolerate being lied to. So basically a personal boundary that is mutually agreed upon, with your partner. Consistent lies occur. This is based off of your observations, right? You're not trying to accuse anybody of lying, but you're just observing. You notice that they're lying. It's been consistent. You don't call anybody out and you just let it go. You let it go. And you're afraid of the consequences. You know that if you decide to confront the person, you may get into a fight. Those fights are not fun. Or you confront the person and they decide that they're going to continue lying and you feel like you're the bad person for doing it. Those are consequences too. So I think a lot of us avoid the consequences, but we create these boundaries. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a good healthy way of doing things is there is an agreement, say for instance, and that you're required to attend each, you come to an agreement with something where, I don't know, for example, you have dinners together every evening, but your partner, your family, whomever, they're always late or they miss majority of the dinners or they have tons of excuses. You communicate the concern, right? And and it's ignored. You provide a warning, again, ignored. So now you must let them go. You'll continue to have dinners and gatherings, but will no longer invite them to be there. All those things, or provide them any say to planning any dinners or having what we're going to eat for dinner, or just removing privileges. I think one of the things about that is you've tried, right? You've tried to make things right. You tried to communicate your concerns. You tried to communicate where the boundary was crossed. And if they ignore it, you're going to have to do something next, which is perhaps moving on with your life. So folks be pushing their luck. It's both comprehension issues alongside with entitlement and self-centered attitudes that their situations are more important than the units, and it's consistent. Having boundaries is healthy. Having accountability and consequences is even healthier. Doing it with compassion returns health to whom it affects. And that's a big one. So that's where the compassion lies. And even that has to have a point of when do you stop? When does compassion become something for somebody else versus the unit? And how do you stop doing that to make people comfortable? Because some people will look at your compassion as weakness and continue taking that for granted or use it against you. But have you ever been in a situation similar to that where maybe you didn't have consequences to boundaries that were crossed, or maybe you did react or have compassion or even activated a consequence?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have experienced, stuff like this where I feel like I'm setting a boundary, but then, then it's like, so what? Like if they continuously, kind of disregard like the boundary that you set, if there's no consequences, then they keep doing it, right? Because I feel like this is like the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh, this is like when you're raising kids, and you're trying to like develop new behaviors for them, and you tell them like this is what you should be doing, but then they don't, and then you don't do anything. Like there's nothing. Like if okay, well, I'm not doing it. Mom says I should, but I'm not gonna do it. If there's no consequences, then they're not really learning the lesson. And sometimes I think the consequence has to be in a language that that person will understand. Like at least when in the instance of like when you're raising kids, like the consequence has to be taking something away that they value. For adults is different, yeah, because we just
Is it different? I don't think so. It's the same thing. I'm sorry. Let's not give an excuse for adults to be adulting. Like, yeah, we can talk to kids a certain type of way, but even that too, I think it should be straight across. The compassion is compassion, and like, I think, if at the end of the day, shouldn't adults know better by now? Or maybe they weren't raised that way. I don't know. Do we blame the parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is definitely like how people are raised. That's living, I know how we're typically raised in Hawaii. But like, having lived just, I mean, you have to like living away and seeing like the differences in how families are raised and the way people act. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. That to me, like that's the culture shock in terms of like, wow, the things that I'm used to, the environments that I'm used to, the behaviors that have been ingrained, and then you're around other people and they act all kinds of crazy, like comparatively, like to us, right? Because they were raised differently, and so I feel like that's a huge part of like navigating these spaces too, is understanding. Okay, they were raised not to say that their behavior is okay, but like having those open conversations when we talk about establishing boundaries. I think that's part of the conversation. Is like, this is, in my mind, this is what it should be. I expect X, Y, or Z because this is how I was raised. And then having a conversation with that person. And then like just helping to get that mutual understanding. Of course, like we've said, some people are not mature enough to have those mutual understandings and they're like stuck in their way. They can only see their way. Like that, to me, that is not healthy. But yeah, definitely coming up with the consequences. And I think, you talked about it a little bit earlier. Sometimes like the consequence that needs to happen is that you need to remove or at least temporarily separate, from that person, the environment, whatever that behavior is that's, just not working. But that is hard to have. Like, and then a lot of times I feel like those conversations that are hard to have are because you care about the person that you're engaging with, whether it's a family member or a significant other.
You say that you care about the other person, or do you care about yourself from getting hurt?
I think it's a little bit both. Like sometimes,
but if that person is lying to you and crossing your boundary, at what point do you think that person cared about you?
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, if they're constantly lying, then that's definitely not somebody who cares about you. And to me, that's the easier one to oki and to to cut, because like it's just at that point it's like not worth your time. I mean, at least for me, like I life is too short. And if they have like those consistent patterns and they're proving it to you, then to me that's when I start to distance those types of people and remove them from my space. It doesn't mean that I cannot malama aloha, I wish you well, whatever, but you cannot be in my space consistently because we talked about it in the previous context, right? The people that you surround yourself with are important because they do influence you and shape you in different ways. And their behaviors, whether it's healthy or toxic, will influence you too. So to me, that's part of like the aloha and self-awareness and understanding. Like,
Yeah. I think one of the things you talked about earlier too was the cultural differences.
mhm,
I will share with you, based off of being a parent in this generation and having kids who have already kind of grown up already. Let's
mhm,
just add the fact that I had to be a single mom and the father and the mother in the house. My opinion, and this is just my opinion only, is like I feel like my generation did the kids an injustice. I'm not gonna lie, like culturally and even at home. I'll say it. I'll be real about it. I mean, only because I think a lot of my generation chose to raise their children differently from the way they were raised because they did not like the way they were raised, whether it was really strict, whether it was just, you know, what they felt was toxic or historical trauma or whatever is they chose to raise their children very, very different, which is interesting because what I see is it's more materialistic love
mhm,
this generation.
mhm,
This generation is less consequences for their actions, less rules, you know. And so, you know, what we're seeing is an effect of my generation, our generation way of raising kids. And it's sad because, like, I'm part of that generation, you know.
mhm.
I mean, for me, a little bit different, maybe because I had to be the mom and dad. Maybe a little bit different too, because I was raised by my grandparents. I wasn't raised by the generation above me. I kind of had no choice. I didn't get the choices. I didn't get the either or. I had it has to be, and that was the hardest part, but probably later down the road, probably the most beneficial. Um, but yeah, I think part of that is, and because we don't have boundaries for our children, we won't have boundaries for ourselves, and having those consequences. You know, I always said I would never. You know, I don't want to be a cheater. If you cheat on me, we're done. We're done, right? And what happened for that person that cheated on you? I bet you still was with them. I bet you still went back. You know what I'm saying? And you're like, no, I believe in them. I believe in potential. And that's where we get stuck.
Mhm.
I believe they're going to change. They said they're going to change. They said they're going to do things differently. You know, they said they were going to show up. They said they weren't going to lie. We hear this, the manipulation part. And I think that's what keeps us in those spaces. But yeah, I think I'm probably not the first, like the one person that'll be like one time done. Like I'm not. I wish I could be, but I'm not. I probably will have patience and give you a lot of chances. That's my freaking problem. But there is a line. There's 1000% a line, and that line is hard because I feel like if I've given you enough patience, I've communicated enough times. When that freaking line drops, there's no coming out of it. It's done, and you will hate me at that point, and I'm fine with that. I don't care.
Yeah.
Because you obviously did not see the compassion I have.
Yeah.
And I will not waste any more. But you know what I mean? I don't know.
No, I absolutely know what you mean. I feel very much the same, you know, like um I give a lot of people chances too. Like I do try to see, you know, like the goodness or the potential in a person. Um and I can pretty much, you know, get along with a lot of people. Um but like once, you know, I like you, I give a lot of chances. But once you rub me the wrong way and you hit that like, oh, okay, and now we pow. Like and just like you, I can just be like, okay, we're done now. And what you do is what you do, but yeah, I cannot already.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I like the analogy of the raising children. So if you're a parent out there, you know, we raise our children a certain way. If you do have rules, I think I had shared like you tell your kids to come home at 10 o'clock because that's curfew, and they push it 10:15, 10:30. What you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You have to provide. If not, they're gonna just go out, and then you're gonna be mad when they get kidnapped, when something happens to them. Then you're gonna beat yourself up because you feel guilty because you let them. You know what I mean? Like it just goes down. Those consequences, when we don't invoke them, they just go down a rabbit hole of like shit that we have to carry and burdens we have to carry for a very, very long time. Versus that one time, like done. You ain't going out. Don't even ask for a month. Don't even ask. Or I'm taking out your car or your phone or your Wi-Fi. I mean, that's the world we live in today. But that one hits hard, right, for a lot of kids, and that hits hard for a lot of people. And with adults, I think the hard part is there's warnings, but at the end of the day, like relationships are harder because you're invested in this space, especially if you have kids or you're married or you share space together. Like it really is harder. I do believe it's a little bit harder, especially if that other person is willing to manipulate you. But there has to be a line, right? For your health, the kids' health, the environment health. And then when it's at work, that's also hard because, contractually or like lawfully, you can't just fire somebody because you don't like them. You gotta go with it, right? You gotta figure out all these things. And it's good because it makes you work towards that. But that's why they have warnings and they have, reprimands, and they have all these things. They take away privileges. So I think that just goes from like the home into life. And then how does that look, and does that work for everybody? And does that translate into our adulthood? I don't know.
No, I definitely think it does translate into adulthood. And I think boundaries are important. Like even if the other person is not manipulative, I think it's just healthy relationships have healthy boundaries. Period. And I think that's something that just needs to be talked about more. I it's one of those like unseen kind of things that like when it's healthy and it's good, it's there. But you may not know that that's what's missing when something is going wrong, or the relationship. There's like pilikia in the relationship. Yeah.
I like that. And I think on the opposite end, right? Boundaries, we have consequences. But when somebody succeeds, we need to learn how to equally celebrate. That's the balance, I think. If we focus on the boundaries and all these consequences, but we don't ever like talk about this, how they succeeded and celebrate that, like that's gonna throw that off balance. And so I think equally we need to look at both sides.
No, absolutely. And I think like the word consequences, like it tends to have like a negative connotation, but good things that happen because of your decisions are also consequences. So like it's not always bad. Like the celebration that we want to have of that achievement is also a consequence. It's a consequence of taking action, of doing all the things that you said you were going to do, hitting all the goals. Like that's a consequence too, right? So I say that because I don't want people who are listening to think like, oh, it's just negative. Like, no, there are positive consequences as well. And so that's why like you should have boundaries, because those consequences can happen on both ends of the spectrum.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's another thing too. And I know I've prefaced this before. It's like, I personally don't believe there is a negative and a positive. Like it's the way we look at things. And so when we understand that through your own perspective, how we're looking at it and how we receive it is really a projection of what we're feeling. So, being able to, and that's the hard part. And I keep saying this, which sounds it sounds very numb, is when I keep saying like, if we just take the emotion part out of the vocabulary definition, and you'll start to see things for what it is. The emotional part is the part that we define things based off of how we feel. But that definition is not going to be the same for everyone. Whereas if we want to come to a neutral space, we have to take that feeling out, that emotional, so that we all can come to the same place and talk about what's in front of us. And then we manage our own personal emotions within us. Or however we choose to do that, with therapy or with a friend, or like going outside into a park, or whatever, but that part of it is where I go the negative and positive, like you said earlier. Like that word does sound negative because we've only heard it in the negative context, but really it's universal. It's a very
Yeah.
universal word. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mahalo for sharing that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so back to the monobob. Like you can have compassion and refuse to put up with someone's nonsense.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely true, and it's absolutely healthy to maintain those boundaries and even reassess them. You know, like maybe you got to pull it in. Maybe you got to be more strict with your boundary, or maybe sometimes maybe you're being too strict. Then maybe you got to let it go. But I think most of the time, you probably have to be more strict. Things are not going the way like you would like them to go, then you probably need to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
little bit more pa with that boundary.
Yeah. And then in our lessons that we do for our Oling Tamauli'ola, we call it our E Papuhaku. It's that it's the rock wall that's movable. And you're not stuck to those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who were like married couples who ended up being single and then being in non-monogamous relationships about this and like going from one perspective into another perspective that left them open,
Yeah.
and they saw things from a different point of view, and that's their boundaries, that's what they chose, but that's the choice they made based off of understanding that they didn't have to stick to that one boundary for the rest of their life,
Yeah.
and communicating that is important. So as long as all parties know what's going on, you're fine.
No, and I think that's really important in that like you don't have to be stuck to just one perspective. Like as life happens and you learn and you're adjusting your worldview, like yeah, that's where those boundaries are moving and learning and all of that stuff. I don't want people to think, because if you just stay in one space then you become stagnant and you're not evolving, which to me is really important. My husband and I talk about evolution a lot. But yeah, that learning space, and having those open conversations, right? Like I know whenever we talk about stuff, it's like everything always goes back to communication, like and being honest in your communication, because I think that's a huge part of it too. Like, are you being fully honest with like what what your boundary is, or are you still only giving maybe 80, 85, 90% because you don't want to hurt the other person, or all of those types of things? That could be a part of it too. And I say this from my own experience, like, and that's something I had to like learn over time. It was like I was giving people, I was taking on too much of the kuleana when it should be more even between two people in a relationship, whether it's a parent-child relationship, significant other, a friend relationship, like all those types of things. It's important to make sure that you're not taking on too much of the kuleana, or vice versa, like not letting the other person, not doing enough on your end and letting the other person handle all of the burdens of the relationship. It's not fair to either one.
Yeah.
And if you guys just cannot come to agreement, then again, maybe it's just time to create space, some distance, and maybe you come back together again later. I've had that too, where I've had friends who we just weren't seeing eye to eye, and we just kind of distance each other. Doesn't mean that I don't aloha them, that I don't love them or care about them. It's just that as you go throughout life in your different stages, everybody's growing at different paces too, right? So you're not going to have the same people around you all the time, and that's okay. But yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about like really quickly because I know we're kind of going through this, but boundaries and standards. Even looking at standards, like do we have standards? Do we have this foundation in which we don't have to put boundaries once we? So what I've learned in growing up was my papa would always, you create boundaries to never have boundaries again. And when you can get to a point where you don't have to have boundaries, it's because you know yourself well enough. You don't need a boundary because you just flow around it. Like you don't even have to talk twice. It's done. Or that stuff doesn't bother you anymore. Those boundaries that you had, when somebody does something to you, they lie consistently to you, it gets to a point where it doesn't bother you anymore. you're still going to go do about your life, and you're still going to do about your day how you would have done it no matter what. Those lies are not mine. Those lies are those persons.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to get to a point where those lies or their deceit or their blaming, their complaining, and all those things don't bother us anymore. We've gotten to a point of a higher intelligence of not having to need boundaries. We set our standards within ourselves, and we don't set standards for what people are to us. We set standards about who we want to be. And I think that's where we need to really get towards. Because you can have the worst person in front of you, the master manipulator, and you just go, you're not going to let them manipulate you, but you're also not going to stand there and like, you just go do what you do. You know, it should never affect you. I mean, I think that's something the kupuna get to when they get to an older age. They learn that so well. That's why half the things don't bother them. Is because they've gotten to that point where they don't need boundaries. That shit doesn't bother me anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so what a beautiful place to be in.
A place that we all aspire to be.
And we all know who gossips the most is the kupuna. They gossip more worse than us. And so if they can still stand each other at like 70, 80 years old, they're good to go. That's where we want to get to, you know.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's important, the standards piece. Yeah. And the standard for yourself. I think like I definitely have high standards. Sometimes it probably drives my own self crazy, you know, but
same here. I drive my own self crazy. I laugh.
Sometimes I gotta
I try to go down and lower my standards, but I don't last that in that area too long.
But I think like to your point of like having standards so that like eventually you don't need boundaries. I think that's kind of like standards kind of like I think of it that in a way like to your brand. Like if people think about Kanoi as a person who is like she's strong, she has a great foundation. And so people who are like at least a little bit self-aware or aware of their environment will know Kanoi is not the type of person to be doing bullshit with. And like those types of people probably just even stay away from me because they're like, it's not even gonna face her. So why am I even gonna try? But I think like that is definitely very important when it comes to like filtering out people who don't need to be, they're just not wavelength, they don't match your energy, right? Like I think after a while it does come to that because I have like some friends who like deal with certain types of people and they're always complaining about it and whatever, and I'm like, I don't know, I never seem to have those types of people, but I think it's because of the energy that I exude, the things that I put out to the world, that I don't have to say it, but I'm showing that certain behaviors and types of people, like I'm not even going to tolerate in my space. So I don't even know why you're even going to try. Just stay away. That's just not the type of people that Moana associates herself with, right? So to me, that's like that's kind of what I think. Like, oh, I have to put up a boundary because people already know like what to expect from me, and maybe like new people coming in who don't know me yet, I'll have to like establish those boundaries. But if you stay around me long enough, you kind of get a sense of like where my thresholds are and what I will entertain and what I won't entertain. And I'm like, just like you, I'm happy to keep it moving. Like I got things to do, lots of kuleana, you know, like I love my family, you know, all that. I know what's important to me. And if I view it as something that's keeping me from achieving those things and accomplishing those things that I've set forth for myself, then I don't even entertain it. That's kind of, you know, where I come at the whole thing. Yeah.
You know who you are and you're consistent in who you are. When the wind blows. And I think that's the vibe that you give. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You've been through some shit. So you can talk about, you know, you stand on that really well. Yeah, I do believe that too. There are a lot of places where I just like, none of that happens to me either. Or I get called auntie. And I'm like,
yes.
And then you don't get called auntie. I'm like, how did you not get called? You look older than me.
Yes, auntie is like part of the vocabulary, and I'm like, Okay.
Yes, I have Kapuna who call me auntie, and I'm like, okay, we'll just go with it. But it's the vibe, right? It's how we put
Yeah.
ourselves out there. So, yeah, well, that was an awesome one, and hope, like I said, compassion doesn't have to be nasty. It just has to be communication that's open, it's kind, and it's firm. And firm doesn't have to be bad. It's not rah. It's
Right.
firm. No, we're not going to be able to have ice cream tonight because you didn't eat your dinner. Easy enough. That's good enough. Now how they act is not on you. If they throw
Yes.
and they want to go talk shit about you to everybody because they didn't get their way, remember that is not you. That is them. Let them go. Do not even pay attention to that. Keep going. Keep going. They be back. I promise. But in the meantime, let them throw their fit. I know it sucks that when people spread rumors and bully and do all those ugly, nasty things to get more politics and people, it hurts. I've been there. We've all been there. It hurts, but let it go because you got other things to focus on. All those goals, all those things that you have set forth, those are there. That stuff is temporary. Trust me. Impermanence is real. You're just the news for the day. By next week, they forget about you. Trust me. Unfortunately, we're not that important for them remember us for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
Next idiot will come in that space. You're the first idiot. Then the next idiot will come in. We'll just keep on doing that for the rest of our life. Anyways, well, thank you so much for allowing me to share. And signing off from the island of Molokai Nui Ahina. It's me, Kanoilani Davis. Mana Bombs powered by Mahina Designs.
And Moana McAdams signing off for the Moana Nui podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to us on YouTube, and of course on your favorite podcast platform. Hope everyone is doing well, and wishing you guys all the best in 2025. Take care, everybody. Till next time. Ahui ho.